Okay. So 17 years I can say that you've been head
Yes.
librarian manager.
No,
Position.
17 years from where I started in libraries. So I first was in a job in a large state university at the University of Illinois Chicago. I was a resident librarian. They had a residency program there. I'm not sure if there's any out here on the West Coast, but there are some around the country. So I spent 2 years in reference. When I finished that job, typically what they did was they either let the people go or they opened tenure track positions and invited the residents to apply. At that time, there was a hiring freeze, so they were able to extend our visiting appointments for another year until the freeze lifted. But at that time, I was invited to move to the circulation department. I had a bit of an unusual course in, because I have a range of things under my belt. And then after a year in circulation, the hiring freeze lifted. I was hired into a tenure track position. So I spent 6 years on tenure track. But in late in 2006, the university librarian indicated to me that she no longer felt circulation needed as many professionals in it as there were. There were 2 of us full-time in my library, and then we also had a library, the health sciences, that reported to the same university librarian, and they had 2 full-timers there. She's looking to move people around, reallocate human resources. So I was given 2 options. One was to be a copyright librarian, and the other was to be a digitization librarian. And I opted for the latter. So I found myself still reporting to circulation half-time and reporting to the cataloging librarian half-time. So I would go to catalog department meetings, and it was a very strange world to me at that time. And then after a year of reporting to the catalog librarian, I was then given over to the new Associate University Librarian for Information Technology, and just came under his care and feeding, I suppose. But under his guidance, I created my own department and was made a department head. So it was called Digital Programs, and I ran that for a few years. In late 2012, my husband's company wanted him to transfer out here. And so we agreed to the transfer if I could find a job that would be a move up. So even though I went from a large state school to a community college, it was moving from a department head where it was a very small department, and I didn't have a budget that I controlled or anything of that. It was just a department head. There wasn't much more to it than that, to actually managing a library. Much smaller library, but I have a budget. I came in, I had collection development responsibilities. So I've done almost everything except pure systems librarianship, I think.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
That's
reference
great.
instruction. I haven't really done cataloging. I just reported to that department, but I've had my hand in a lot of things by this point now.
Yeah. So just for clarity, how long have you been here at?
I've been here for 4 years.
4 years.
4
okay.
years, 1 month.
Thank you. So, judging by your array of job descriptions, would you say that you have satisfaction as a manager?
I do, yes. I think in part because of this environment. I have thought about whether I would want to move into a similar role in a much larger library. One thing about the community college is it's so small that I'm still able to do frontline work. And that's important to me. When I was in my previous position as a department head, I had interesting projects. I managed a small staff, and that was great experience. But I found that I was really cut off from the rhythms of the academic environment. So my projects just went on as they went on. We got a new collection, we digitized it, and we promoted it. Whatever it may be, it didn't matter whether the students were in session or not. But here I interact with the students, and I'm really connected to the rhythm of things there. So I think I have a great deal more satisfaction in this job where there actually is a blend of frontline in it, but I get the managerial experience as well.
Oh, great. That's actually very great to know. What would you say that your management style is?
Oh, gosh. If you're asking me for some sort of textbook model, I'm not sure what I could say. I'd like to think that I'm collaborative.
Okay.
I like to think that You'll notice that there's another desk here in the office. I'm a faculty member, although I manage the library. I'm a faculty member, and so there's another faculty member, a full-time librarian here, and I frequently turn around and sound her out on ideas. But I don't just sound her out. I try to get opinions from all of the staff. So when we're doing something that's planning in nature, our annual program review, which is what we use to ensure that we're on course with the goals that we set, and it also allows us to consider new goals and put them into place, but it also, on top of that, ties to all of our budgetary needs. What I do is I very directly involve the full-time faculty, the handful of us that are full-time faculty. We've done things where we'll actually map things on the wall with sticky notes and things like that of where we want to go and what things relate. But I also draw in the classified staff, and that's another thing I hope is that I'm not just keeping things at one level, but I'm looking at all the people in the library, what strengths and what knowledge they have, and trying to tap into that and give them a sense of ownership of it.
Now, going off of that, can I ask you what you feel you've learned in your role as manager? In the past 4 years.
I've learned that you learn what battles you are going to pick. You do learn that because within the library, there's not really battles. You know, there may be territories, domains. The staff may have their own issues. You do learn which ones of those things. If you have staff who butt heads, okay, where do you need to mediate? Where do you need to just let them work it out, or where do you just need to say let it go? But in terms of the overall academic environment, that's where you learn which administrators, which faculty colleagues, who are you going to go head to head with, and when do you just sort of graciously bow out. That's been a really interesting lesson. And managing a library, I feel very protective of my staff. I want them to know that I have their back. If they have not done anything wrong, if they have done things according to procedure, according to policy, then I want them to know that if someone else outside of the library is calling them out, is somehow criticizing them, I'm not going to stand for that. And that you have to still be careful there. So it's learning to pick which battles to go after, I think is important.
Okay. So you would say that the most difficult part is learning how you can communicate with specific people?
Or learning your limitations learning when you have to compromise or learning when you have to acquiesce.
Okay.
And learning how you might be able to trade that off for gains down the road. Or sometimes you won't even realize those gains, but you're just doing it so that you're not going to lose ground, you're going to at least maintain something, but if that maintaining something is peace even. You know? And that makes it sound like it's a terribly combative environment. It's not. But in any academic environment, the different schools and divisions and units, they are all struggling for a piece of a limited piece of pie. So
Okay.
it happens.
And having to kind of go around that, trying to get a piece of that pie, would you say that's the most frustrating part of being a manager?
It can be. It certainly is one frustration. It's funny. I have less frustration now that I have more responsibility than I did when I was a middle manager just running a department. Because when I was running a department, I didn't have control over a budget, and I didn't have as much control over personnel. I managed the operations of the department and what the people in it were doing, but the hiring and that wasn't really, well, if it was discipline, it was up to me, right? But there were decisions that were out of my hands. Whereas when you're in charge of the library, yes, I still have to go by what the college dictates, and there are frustrations there because budgets can be tight. We're all limited by a certain, budgetary environment. But it's very freeing to be able to say, okay, I may only get this much budget, but at least I can make the decisions on how that budget is spent. or I now have a greater say in hiring decisions, things like that. Yes, I have to work through HR. It may be dependent on the chancellor's priorities for hiring new faculty, for example. But when that decision gets made to hire new faculty, then I'm leading the way on who I want in place. So there are frustrations, budgetary ones, the constraints otherwise out there in the larger institution. But I found it's, as I said, very freeing that I have this greater responsibility.
Mm-hmm. And would you say that's like the biggest reward?
It certainly has been an enormous reward.
Okay.
It very much has. But other rewards that I personally have realized, in this small community college environment where I've had to dabble in things like collection development, there were some gaps in my experience.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been able to add to that, and that's been immensely satisfying. And then, as I mentioned earlier, in this small environment where I'm required to do frontline work, in fact, this afternoon I'll go over to our other campus and I'll be the librarian at the service desk all
Mm-hmm.
afternoon. I really appreciate that I can balance the frontline work with the managerial. I think that's just such a rich experience.
That's great. So keeping your managerial skills up to date,
Mm-hmm.
you would say that it would be just doing the frontline plus.
No, there are professional development activities here on campus
Okay.
that we can take advantage of.
Okay.
There's a huge range of them, and there are things that we deal with leadership, for example, that are more theoretical in nature, I would say. So there's a leadership program that I've participated in the first round of, and then there's a second round. The first one deals in teamwork, for example. The second one is more individual, but they don't offer the second round as often, so I haven't been able to do it yet.
And this is just provided by the college?
This is provided by the college. They have a very robust professional development program here that many people, classified staff, adjuncts, full-time faculty can all tap into to varying degrees. But then there are the more practical skills. So you need to know more about the accounting system. Well, we've got a workshop for you. And so there's a lot of opportunities here. I know that there are opportunities out there in the professional associations. I find I'm not able to tap into those quite as much, in part because of the volunteer work I do in the association. So I get so tied up in committee work, I don't get to go to workshops.
Mm-hmm.
But there are other opportunities out there if you're not really a member, you're not looking to volunteer. So the community colleges themselves run a yearly get together for the directors, where we can come together and we can compare what's going on. We can hear about new initiatives, and there's movement within the regions. We're paired with Antelope Valley and Santa Barbara and Cuesta and Bakersfield. So I know that recently the person who represents us to the statewide body is wanting us to kind of coalesce more. So I'm hopeful that will result in conversations, at least, that'll say, oh, what are you doing at your library? What are practices I can think about and explore and maybe implement? So there are those opportunities, but I would say it really starts here at the college for me.
So would you feel that with your current position, you can telecommunicate a lot of the work to different employees, or do you feel more comfortable taking care of that yourself?
Oh, that's something that I've been very glad to do. When I first came here, there were only 2 of us who were full-time, and we've added 2 more full-timers since then. And it's been terrific to be able to say, okay, there you go. This is in your job description. If you need me to step in any way, then let's talk about that, because I can certainly provide support. So my colleague who sits here does collection development. It's something, when I first got here, it landed entirely on me, and that was on top of doing reference work, occasional instruction, all the scheduling, program review, and that collection development is a lot of fun. But I was very glad when I hired her and was able to say, okay, this is your responsibility now. We've had occasions where we've suddenly been given large pools of money, and she said, can you look for things in these subject areas that I know you know better than I do, Peter? And I'm glad to do it, but I'm so happy to be able to say that. Or I'm really glad that I have staff I can say, okay, your job, great. Now let's think of an initiative. Let's try to push this forward instead of just maintaining it. And I don't need to be the person driving it. One thing that I've now been able to do this semester, and and all going forward, is